Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this Wildlife Carers webinar, which is part of the Turtle Project. And so, just by introduction, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their deep spiritual connection to country. I also pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be joining us tonight. Right, so I'm Sylvia Clark, for those that don't know me. I'm from the Murraylands and Riverland Landscape Board, and I also have Alice Woodward on here with me, who's just waving. She's also from the Murraylands and Riverland Landscape Board, and I'll be the host for tonight, and Alice will be helping out in the background, letting people in. I do ask that while the speakers are speaking, if you keep yourself on mute. I'm sure some of you might have some quite noisy animals in the background, just to make sure that everyone can hear the speakers. And it's up to you if you keep your cameras on or not, or off. It can be a little distracting having cameras on, but that's up to you. So the speakers will have their cameras on. If you do forget to mute, or for some reason it comes off, Alice has the power to mute you, and you can then undo it later if needed. We will have question time for our speakers. And if you have questions, please type them into the chat function, which you should be able to find up the top of your screen. I think Alice has popped a chat in, and there's a couple of people that have already been chatting so far. So we'll be keeping an eye. Hi, Rachel. We'll be keeping an eye on the questions as they come in, and we'll start by answering those questions, and then we'll also allow people to turn their microphones and cameras on and ask questions as well. I think we should have time for that. So I really hope you enjoy the presentations, and I'll just let you know what they are. Well, no, actually, how about I tell you what the Turtle Project is first? So Turtle is actually an acronym. We've got more and more people coming in. Turtle is an acronym for Together Understanding and Recovering Turtles in Our Landscapes and Ecosystems. So this is a project where we've got state government money to we started with the citizen science project linked with the National 1 Million Turtles program, which really increased awareness of turtles and brought a whole lot of really good citizen science data in. With this Turtle Project, we're trying to take that a step further, still doing a whole lot of citizen science to help us collect really important information and connect with people. But we're also taking it a step further with more monitoring, research and citizen science, and also on-ground conservation. And wildlife carers are obviously a key part of on-ground conservation. So we're very pleased to have you here. And one of the other things I'd like to do is create a management plan for the state to guide future research, action and investment, because at the moment there isn't one recovery plan or anything like that for turtles in South Australia. And as you'll hear from Mike, they really need some help. So our speakers for tonight are Professor Mike Thompson, formerly from the University of Sydney, or still connected with the University of Sydney. And he'll be giving us an introduction to the turtles of South Australia, and there will be some question time during that time. Unfortunately, Rosemary Breedle from Department of Environment and Water, the permits person from state government, isn't able to, was called away, unfortunately, for a family need at the last minute, so isn't able to be here tonight. So I will just give a little bit of information that I have gleaned from the website relating to permits and requirements, but I understand you might well have questions for Rosie, and she's very happy to take them on notice. So Alice will be collecting them in the background. So please, if there's anything permit related, please chuck it in, and we'll get some answers for you from Rosie. And then we're very, very pleased to have Dr. Amelia Cottle here, who's a vet from the Unusual Pet Vets, who will be giving us a little bit of information about turtle injuries and illnesses and things that carers might come across. Thank you so much, Amelia. And hopefully we'll all be wrapped up by 8 o'clock with you getting lots of useful information and asking us all the questions that you have. So that's where I will leave it for now. and I will hand over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Sylvia. I'll just set. Oh dear. Oops. Oh, I'll get there in it. Okay. Can everybody see that okay?
I think it might be coming up.
Ah.
Not yet.
No.
No. Try again.
It says I'm sharing.
Alice, can you see it?
No, not yet.
All right, I'll stop sharing. Oh, you said my stop sharing thing just went off. Stop sharing. Okay, I'll just try it again. Share.
Trying again.
Yes, try again. Try a different one. How's that?
That looks fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about turtles of South Australia. As Sylvia said, I'm attached to the University of Sydney, but I began researching turtles in South Australia. I did my PhD on turtles, mostly in the Riverland, but also in the lower lakes and various other places as well. And since then, I've studied turtles in Florida and various parts of Australia. And I've retired now back to South Australia and live at Birdwood. I can reach just about every part of the Murray as a day trip now, which is really good. I'm starting here with a picture of a long-necked turtle because I think most of the people in this audience, probably this is the species they're going to come across most often. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. And just to add to Sylvia's acknowledgement of traditional owners, I'd like to acknowledge all the people who are interested in turtles and are doing a fantastic job at helping to conserve turtles, because as I'll show you, they're in deep trouble in South Australia in particular, or at least in parts of South Australia. Okay. I'm just trying to, I don't seem to be able to change the slide. Didn't try that before, Sylvia.
If you click on your actual presentation, there we go.
Yep, here we go.
Got it.
Okay, I've just put in a couple of pictures of sea turtles, because sea turtles occasionally do occur in South Australia. Most of them are vagrants that have come from, or they've got here accidentally. I'm not going to say very much about sea turtles. I don't know so much about sea turtles, but the ones that are most likely to turn up and carers get called out for will be these vagrants, and usually they wash up dead in South Australia, or they're pretty well moribund. There is one species that does occur here naturally, and it's huge. It's a leatherback turtle, and it doesn't wash up very often, and usually it washes up dead because they get caught in fishing nets, and they're so big. It's the world's biggest reptile. They're so big that they drag the nets along for days and days, and eventually the turtle drowns, unfortunately. It's not changing again. My focus, though, is going to be the freshwater turtles. So we have 3 species of freshwater turtles in South Australia. One of the species has 2 subspecies. So the 2 images at the top are the short-necked turtle, and in the Cooper Creek there's 1 subspecies, and in the Murray there's another subspecies, and they're the only places that they occur naturally in South Australia. So I'm not going to say much about the Cooper Creek turtle other than its biology, its anatomy, its physiology is almost identical to that from the Murray, and I'm not sure that people are very often going to get a Cooper Creek turtle to look after, unless you live in the Minka or something. But you very often might get a Murray short-necked turtle. The bottom left image is the broad-shell turtle. This is quite a rare species of turtle, and I'll talk more about it later. But it's a very, very large species, and it does not come onto the land very often. and it's the species that is most likely to turn up and need care. And the eastern longneck on the bottom right is the most widespread and common species in the state, actually in Australia. It's a small species and it walks around on land a lot. And this is the one that will get handed into carers most often. Before I go any further, I just wanted to mention TurtleSat. So TurtleSat is a free mobile phone app, or you can do it on the computer, where you can register any observations of turtles, and there's a map that's available to everybody, with dots on it, as you can see on the left there, and those dots represent observations of the different colours of different species, or their nests, or predation, or turtles run over on the road, or whatever. So we encourage everybody to put all their turtle observations into this, and it's used very widely around Australia. I'm now going to just give you a little bit about the biology of each of the three species, and starting with the eastern longneck, because that's the one that you're most likely to come in contact with. This is a species that I think does best if it's got permanent access to permanent and temporary waters. So especially on the River Murray. So the temporary waters are the very rich environments, but as their name suggests, they're temporary. But when they're full of water, there's lots of food for the turtles in there, and the turtles migrate into those places to harvest energy, so they've got enough reserves to lay down yolk to produce eggs. This is the most terrestrial of the species, and in places like the hills in Fleurieu, they live in farm dams, and they might have maybe even 3, 4, 5 farm dams that they inhabit, and they walk from one to the other. Why they do that, we're not quite sure, but they do. It's obvious if the pond dries up that they might look for somewhere else, but this species also has the ability to estivate. And what that means is if the pond dries up, they can come out onto the land, and what they do is basically partially bury themselves under leaf litter and maybe a bit of dirt or sand or something, and they can hunker down there for weeks on end, just out of the water. Their metabolism shuts down as much as possible, and they don't move, waiting for the rain to come and the pond to fill up again. So if you need to keep this turtle out of water, it's not a problem, but I'll talk about that a little bit more later. This species nests in early summer, so the nesting is going to be beginning very soon, may already have started to nest in some places, and unfortunately there was a squash one on the road just between here and Mount Pleasant this morning that I think was stimulated to come out and look for somewhere to nest last night by the storm. All of the species that I'll talk about are triggered to come out of the water to find a place to nest by storms. This is the smallest of the species, and it has the smallest clutch size. Someone told me the other day that they actually found 19 eggs in a nest, but the average clutch size is about 10 to 12, and it ranges from 2 up to 19. If you're unsure of the species, if you flip it over, this species always has black lines between the scutes on the bottom part of the shell, which is called the plastron. And so, like the image on the left there, and none of the others have those black lines as a demarcation between the shields on the plastron. The exception is when they first hatch, and the image in the middle is a hatchling. You can see by the size of the thumb there that has orange or red spots underneath. And they're basically black, but as they grow, the orange spots disappear, the plastron becomes light in colour, like you can see on the adult there, and the black lines develop. Hatchlings are very not very often seen. Here's a map from the Atlas of Living Australia with their records of long-necked turtles, and you can see I've focused on South Australia here, of course. So this is the most widespread species in South Australia, as I said. And you can see lots of records for the southeast, all along the Murray, lots for the hills in Fleurieu, and then going right up almost to the southern Flinders Ranges. And there are a few other odd spots. The spot on Kangaroo Island, I don't know what that's about. That might have been an escaped pet or something, because turtles aren't naturally on Kangaroo Island. And the ones on Eyre Peninsula probably also either incorrectly identified or escaped pets. Okay, and I've put here eastern long-necked turtle and eastern snake-necked turtle, because you'll see them called both of those in various times. We're talking about the same species. It's why we biologists tend to use the Latin names: Chelidina longicollis, longy, long, collis, neck, long-necked turtle. Okay, the short-necked turtle, Emigera macquarei. So I'm focusing on the Murray one here. This is the one that you often see basking. So you can see on the image on the bottom right there of these turtles out of the water basking on a log. In the wild, like on the Murray, they see you coming hundreds of meters before you see them, and they just jump into the water. They're very shy animals. All of the species nest on land, and this species nests about the same time as the long necks and more or less in the same place. It's a much bigger species. It grows to the size of a dinner plate or more, and hence it has much larger eggs. If you've got an egg, it's sometimes difficult to tell the difference between a short neck egg and a long neck egg, because there's a big overlap in the size, although the short necks are on average a little bit bigger than the long necks. This is a species of permanent water. Until recently, we didn't think they walked across land, certainly not like the long necks do. But some of the radio tracking data recently suggests that occasionally they do walk across land from one water body to another. But they're a species of permanent water. And in South Australia, they're regarded as vulnerable. There's an egg hatching on the left, and in the middle there is a hatchling. You can see the hatchlings look more or less like like small versions of the adults. That one's got a radio transmitter on it, because we're trying to understand the biology of hatchlings. It's sort of the lost part of their life cycle, the bit that we know least about. The other thing about this species is it's the one that is kept most or sold most commonly in pet stores. There are all three species are sold in pet stores, but this is the most common one. And a lot of people buy them, as you can see how big they are there from the fingers holding that turtle, not realizing that they're going to grow bigger than a dinner plate, and they're going to live for well over 50 years, probably well over 80 years. So you need to have the facility to look after them and leave them in your will to your children or your grandchildren or something. And unfortunately, what a lot of people do is say, oh, we can't cope with this anymore, or we're sick of it or something. So we'll do the right thing and let it go in the local waterway. So this species is now quite widespread in areas where it never occurred previously. And you can see that on this map from Atlas of Living Australia. It occurs naturally in South Australia only on the Murray and in the lower lakes, but you can see records scattered all over the place. So down, you see the records at Mount Gambier. They're released pets in Valley Lake. See the records up near Lake Torrens, up in the desert. They're actually turtles that were released into Aruna Dam at Lee Creek. So, and all of those ones around Adelaide and the hills in Fleurieu are introduced pets. So there is a bit of a problem, and what I'm encouraging you to do if these animals are handed in is not to go and let them go in a water body, and we can talk about that later. The third species is the broad-shelled turtle. This is almost an enigmatic species. It's not very often seen. It's out of sight, out of mind. It's vulnerable in South Australia. The numbers are low. It's an animal of permanent deep water. It's a specialist on fast-swimming prey like fish. The only time it comes on land, so it doesn't bask or anything, the only time it comes on land is to lay eggs, and it lays eggs out of phase with the other species. So this species nests in autumn. It's very large. It's twice as long as an adult, but the shell is twice as long as an adult short neck. I'm just holding my hands here, almost half a metre long, the shell, and the head and neck are just as long, or if not longer. So when this animal is out looking for a nest site, it's a massive animal. It's a spectacular sight to see them walking across the land. They don't lay that many more eggs than the other species, but the eggs are much larger, and you can usually recognise that this is a broad-shelled turtle egg if you find it. This species, the eggs normally take 7 months to a year to hatch, or at least for the hatchlings to emerge on the surface, but there's one record of them taking almost 2 years. Okay, so what do they eat? So each of the species has a different diet. So the longnecks are obligate carnivores. So they eat anything that they can catch. That's usually invertebrates. They're not good at catching fast-swimming prey. They'll gobble up tadpoles, but that's about as fast as they get. They try to catch fish, but they're just not very good at it. And as I said before, they exploit these fringing wetlands when they're flooded because of the high productivity. The high productivity means there's a lot of food for them in there in terms of these invertebrates and maybe tadpoles as well. The shortnecks, by contrast, are omnivores. So they not only eat anything that they can catch, any small animals, invertebrates or otherwise, but they also eat aquatic plants. And the one estimate from one of the turtle breeders suggests that they need about 30% of their diet to be plants. And we know that they eat submerged macrophytes, and particularly ribbonweed, but we also know they eat filamentous algae if nothing else is available. And in captivity, people often feed them lettuce. But it's important to have that range of food for them. And the laboratory studies that have been done show that they actually can extract more nutrients from the animals that they eat if they've got plant material in their gut as well. But they can live just on animal material for a period of time. The broad-shelled turtles are also obligate carnivores. They don't eat any plant material. And as I said before, these are the specialists on fast-swimming prey. They'll eat anything that they can catch, but they specialise in small fish and those fast-swimming prawns that you get in the Murray. And that what I put here is their success therefore depends on a healthy fish and prawns. And I've just highlighted that all three species eat carrion, and carrion is the dead animals in the water. So these are these turtles help maintain a clean water environment. Sylvia, you need to tell me if I'm going too long here too, because I didn't pay attention to the time.
We might need you to just keep moving, because I know you've got a lot to say here.
I do. Okay. So we often call these the vacuum cleaners of the Murray. One of the important things to remember, though, is all three of these species need to be in water to feed. They need to be, and they swallow underwater. So even if you've got a pet turtle and it pokes its head out the water and you give it some meat, it will take it under the water to swallow it. So if you're rehabilitating a turtle and you've got it out of water for a while, for them to feed, they need to be in water. All species of turtles in the world but one lay eggs. All of our species lay eggs. As I said before, they take between, most of them, the long necks and the short necks, take 2 to 3 months to hatch usually, although sometimes they stay in the nest, so they hatch in autumn, but they might stay in the nest until spring and not emerge on the surface until the following spring. And the broad-shelled turtles can take up to nearly 2 years. Okay, generally speaking, the males are smaller than the females, and here's the short neck here. There's a male on the left, female on the right, and the males have a much, much longer tail than the females, and it's relatively easy to see that in mature individuals. Fertilization is internal, and our species mate in the water with the male on top of the female, which is partly why you need such a long tail. Long-necked turtles are notoriously difficult to sex, so you might not be able to sex them. male on the left here, female on the right. The difference in the black lines on the scutes is not associated with their sex. It's just the one on the right is sort of the minimum amount of black lines that you get. And you can see they pull their tail right in, so you can't tell which one's got the longer tail. The females tend to have a convex plastron, plastron being the bottom part of the shell. Males tends to be concave, fits with the female shells when they're mating in the water, and the females need to have as big a body as possible to contain as many eggs as possible. In very mature individuals, the females have a U-shaped notch here at the bottom. It facilitates egg laying, whereas the males, it's sort of V-shaped. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the anatomy of the shell. So this is a long-necked turtle, and what you're seeing is a keratinized shell. The keratin, each of these shields, as we've called them here, is essentially like the scales on a snake. So they're the scales of the turtle. The shell has two components, though. It has the keratinized layer over the top and bone underneath. The keratinized layer is shed from time to time. And unlike a snake, they don't shed it all at the same time. So here's an individual here that's shed the shields on the posterior part of the shell, but not on the anterior part yet. So if you see something like that, it's perfectly natural. They'll grow back. They probably mostly do it about once a year, but it's variable depending on how fast they're growing and everything else. Underlying the shields are the bones, and the joins between the bones and the joins between the shields do not overlap, or mostly do not overlap, provides for a very, very strong shell. There's the shields, and I've overlaid the bones here. One of the points that I wanted to make is that often you'll get damage around the edge, like the margin. These are called marginal scutes. I'll just pull them here, marginal shields. There's been quite a lot of work done on innovation and vascularization of the marginals, there's very few in the way, or in some places, virtually no nerve endings around the edge of the shell. So there's no sort of pain issues associated with that, and there's fairly small amount of vascularization as well. Are you going to tell me to stop, Sylvia? I'll just show you here. Here's the bones of a long neck. You can see the joins between the bones, and over the top, these are the impressions of where the shields were. Okay, they leave the water to nest. They construct the nest with the back legs, lay the eggs, cover them with soil, tamp down the nest, go back to the water, and never come back again. The nests incubate. The eggs incubate in the nest. They hatch synchronously, and they have mechanisms to enable the synchronous hatching, and the babies all generally come out and emerge on the surface and run down to the water together to help protect them against predation. So they suffer quite high mortality from all sorts of things like magpies and crows and ibis and whatever. They nest in open areas. So here's a place in the southeast, and the heavy shade of the trees, turtles don't nest. They nest in this one glade, and they all come out and nest together, and there's indications of markers where turtles nested in that particular season. Now, we're really concerned, and the sort of genesis of this project is the massive declines of turtles in the Murray. And between about 1980 and 2010, we know that long-necked turtles declined by 91%, short-necked turtles by 69%, and the broad-shelled turtles, which are the rare ones, actually didn't change at all. And these are all estimates from a place in Victoria on the Murray, but we know that on the Murray in South Australia, the situation is much, much worse than that. We don't actually have the actual numbers other than to know that it's worse. And why is it worse? Well, often what you see, mostly what you see of a nest is it's been dug out by a predator, and that predator almost always is foxes. It's not totally foxes. There are native predators that take the eggs as well. If you see eggshell on the surface, that nest has been taken by a predator. And you can see on the top right here that the foxes also kill the reproductive females. So those shells on the bottom were all taken from a fox den, and they're all reproductive females of long necks and short neck turtles. That's a spot in Victoria. And what that means is that the turtles, you can see none of those shells are cracked. The foxes can't crack the shells, so they eat the head and legs off. So sometimes you get a turtle with a leg eaten off by a fox, and the turtle's alive. I found one on my property. The Torrens goes through my property with both legs bitten off at the knees, and that's a big problem for the turtles. So that individual was euthanized. Getting run over on the road is a big problem. So on Turtlesat, in this particular study, more than half of the reported deaths were from being run over on the roads, but they do get run over on, well, that's what you mostly see. So that's all three species there. We'll move on. So I imagine that quite a lot of turtles get handed into carers by people picking them up on the roads. And they do sometimes get run over. I saw one get hit and the tyre hit the edge of the shell and it flipped up and it spun around about a metre off the ground and came down, and it had some damage on its marginal scutes, but not very much. So how do turtles come into care? And I'll just put this together as sort of an armchair thing, and I'm sure you'll hear more from you about that than I know, but you're going to have injured ones, and that's mostly going to be from cars or foxes, but it could also be from dogs or them falling down off walls or whatever. I put lost in inverted commas because sometimes they are pets that escaped, and sometimes they're long necks that are going from pond to pond, and people think that they're lost and they want to rescue them and hand them into a wildlife carer. I mentioned the unwanted pets before, and we can discuss that later if you want. Sometimes there are sick individuals, but not that often in the wild. You might get sick individuals in captivity, and they get eye infections and so on. And if you're rehabilitating one and you put it in a concrete fish pond outside or something, often they get abrasions of the bottom part of the shell, and that doesn't do them much good. Fish hooks need to be removed because fish hooks are quite dangerous for them. And this individual on the bottom right here was one in the Millennium Drought that was infested with these marine tube worms that came into the lower lakes. And I saw Deanne. Hi, Deanne. Was registered. And Deanne can probably tell you much more about that because she rescued hundreds and hundreds of them. So some key points I want to mention are our turtles are aquatic, but they can stay out of water for extended periods, especially long necks if you need to rehabilitate them, but they must feed in water. I've just put here, and hopefully we'll hear more about that from our vet, is the cracked shells can be repaired. And Deanne's got good experience with that as well. And I'll say something about wound healing later. This image on the right, what you'll often get is these long neck turtles and sometimes short necks with this algae growing all over the shell. And the temptation is to scrub it all off. Don't do that. That alga is one that only grows on the shells of turtles. There's been a long relationship between this alga and the turtles. So leave it on there. And I can tell you some stories about some consequences of scrubbing it all off if you do that. And the final warning is if you see one of these, whatever you do, don't let it go and report it to PIRSA or whoever we report it to, Sylvia. This is one of the 50 most invasive species of animals in the world. It's a North American turtle. It does occur in Australia, and I've only ever heard of 2 records in South Australia. I read it in the Advertiser where 2 of them were left in a flat when somebody did a runner on the flat. I'll just leave you with a few portraits of turtles. Oh, unshare, if I can. Stop share.
Stuck with you forever, Mike.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. That was very much a whirlwind tour of turtles from South Australia. And I just had one question that came in from Deanne while you were showing the maps about the eastern long-necked turtles, and there were some spots up near Burra, and she's just wondering, do you think they'd naturally occur there?
Yeah, it's a
Pretty
very
dry
good
there.
question, Deanne. I suspect they probably didn't, but I can't discount it. There are some old records from Saddleworth, which isn't all that far from Burra, and because this species moves across land quite a lot, I can't discount that they aren't there naturally. But I suspect the ones that you've received from there, well, there might be a combination of local ones and released pets as well, because long necks were the main pet back in the 1960s and 1970s. So a lot of those did get released in different places.
Thank you. Yes, so we can see how it can be very difficult for carers if they end up, particularly with a long neck, that comes to them to know if it is a pet or if it's one that was naturally in the area. Okay, so that's probably a good segue for me to very quickly go through permits. And as I imagine most of you are actually wildlife carers, you're probably much more across this than me. Okay, there's just another question that's come in. I'll just get to that in a minute, Alice. I'll just quickly go through my permit because that links in with what I'm about to say about permits. So the main message on the permitting site that I could see was that most mammals, birds and reptiles are protected, and turtles are one of those species that are protected under the National Parks and Wildlife Act. And so that means that you require a permit if you need to move, catch or kill, hopefully we're not killing them, the protected animals or eggs. So then you'll need to get a capture and release wildlife permit. So in regards to permit, what it says on the website is, if a native animal needs help, to call a local wildlife rescue organisation, and they suggest searching the internet to find one. So if we have time at the end, it'd be interesting to hear from you, wildlife carers, what you think of that. Obviously, that's what you'd like to do, but how you think that works for you. And then it says, if an experienced wildlife rescuer is not available and you feel you're capable of moving it, you can do so safely. And if it's injured, to call a vet and let them know you're coming to drop off a native animal. The vet can provide first aid and may then organise for the animal to go to a wildlife carer for rehabilitation. And then it says that animals that are rehabilitated must be released back where they are found. So then it also has a little bit more information on that in terms of rescuing animals. So anyone needs a permit. So obviously wildlife carers already have them, but if someone else wants to rescue one, they will need to apply for a permit to do that. And you can either just do it as a once-off for an animal, or you can become a wildlife carer, which I believe is a slightly different permit to then protect many animals. And if you want to keep a rescued animal that is unfit for release, you will also need a permit for that. So then there was a whole lot of guidelines that I waded through trying to find things related to turtles. And it was talking about the rescue of protected wildlife. And these are the reasons why you would do that. If they're sick, injured or incapacitated, if they're escaped pets, in inverted commas, if animals are impacted by natural disasters, which could be a fire, perhaps, or if animals are in imminent danger, such as located on a busy roadway. So I believe that means that moving one that is in imminent danger of being squashed on a road is all fine. And a rehabilitated animal should be returned as close as practical to the location of the original encounter, or if this is impossible, to a suitable environment nearby within its normal home range. So that takes us back to what Mike said. So if it's a short-necked turtle that's in the Adelaide region, then that is not its normal home range. So it should not be released back into a waterway in the Adelaide region or anywhere outside the Murray, and will need to be rehomed somewhere else instead. So I just had a question here from Alice. And some of these I may need to take on notice if none of us here know the answers. Should all turtles have a vet check if they're found wandering? Mike?
I don't believe so. Only if there's something obviously wrong with them. If they're bleeding, or if there's, obvious physical damage, or if they look like they're infected, if they've got swollen eyes or something like that. But most of, especially for long necks, most of them will just be going walkabout.
Yes, thank you. We did have another question here, and I think this we'll have a go at answering. What happens if a confirmed pet needs to, if it is a confirmed pet, does it need to be surrendered somewhere? Now, from talking to Rosie at the department, I believe yes, and they used to always go to Cleveland, but because it's fenced, but Cleveland is apparently full. So at the moment, there isn't a fabulous place to anywhere to take them. So, but they will need to be rehomed. They can't be released. So it is a little bit, it's a bit tricky. And one thing we're looking at is whether we could set up something with schools. Schools love having turtles and should be around for a long time. So whether we can look at rehoming turtles that are in the wrong place through schools. But that's about all I can offer at the moment. So there's probably a lot of conversation about this, but I might just hand over to our wonderful vet to tell us what she knows first, and then we'll see if we've got some time for a bit more of a chat later on. Thank you, Dr. Amelia Cottle.
Beautiful, thank you. I will attempt to share my screen. All right, can you see that?
Yeah, if you just want to put it on slideshow mode.
Yep, it is on, so it might be lagging.
Coming. Yeah, I can just see all your slides at the moment.
Do it again. Is that working?
Yeah, can still see all your slides, but it works if you
hang on, let me try one more thing. Let's try the entire screen.
Still the same. Oh, there we go. Beautiful.
That work? Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm just doing a very short presentation on sort of the most common things we see as vets, what turtles are presenting with when they come into our clinics. I work at Unusual Pet Vets in Prospect. So we see way more pet turtles than wild turtles, but we do occasionally get the odd wildlife case in that we need to triage and treat for first aid. So beyond anything, shell trauma is the most common thing we see. So I'm going to spend more time sort of talking about that rather than some of these other things. Fish hooks are sort of the next one that we commonly see. Skin injuries and infections, much less likely. It's usually subsequent to some sort of trauma. They don't often get infections and things. The captive ones do all the time because it's related to water quality and things like that when they're in captive housing. And poor body condition. Sometimes we get wild turtles that are in poor body condition, but again, it's not as common, particularly compared to captive guys. So there will be some graphic images coming up. So just be warned if you don't want to see them. Cover your screen maybe. So some of these images are tortoises because in the UK and the States, tortoises are very, very common as pets. So they are sort of treated very commonly for these issues. But in our wildlife, as Mike said, they get hit by cars quite a bit, or they're attacked by predators. Often canines, so foxes and dogs and things. When we get presented with these sorts of wounds, we need to consider that predators' mouths are really dirty. There's lots of bacteria involved. So we need to be careful about bacterial contamination and infection and sepsis as well. So Mike went through a bit of the anatomy as well, but just so it's very clear, the carapace is the top shell, the plastron is the bottom, so the tummy area, and the bridge is the bit in between, so the bit that connects the top shell to the bottom shell. So, you know, if you're calling up a vet clinic and you say, oh, I've got a fracture in the middle of the carapace or the middle of the plastron or something like that, that's actually really useful information for the vets, because we know potentially what to expect when this turtle comes in. And I'll go through some of the injuries to locations in a minute. So there's hard bony plates, and then there's the scutes that are cover the bony plates. They're covered with keratin, which is a very strong protein compound. Both of these have the ability to regenerate. So if everything is stable, we can grow back these bones, we can grow back the keratin. The bony scutes are continuous with the spine and the ribs. So we do need to be aware that injury to these areas could potentially cause nerve damage, because we have nerves that go in, well, from the spinal cord, which is in between all the vertebrae. They branch out into the limbs, into everywhere in the body. So we need to be aware of long-term effects of nerve damage as well. The shell has really good blood supply, so it does bleed. It does have nerves in it, and like Mike said, the marginal scutes are less nerve and blood supplied. So turtles will feel things that they have on their shell. So if they have injuries to the shell, it's really quite painful. So we need to be aware, and we need to be providing pain relief to them when they have these injuries. The lungs sit directly below the well, we've got the shell, we've got the skeleton, and then we've got the lungs. So if we have injuries to the carapace, we can go into the lung cavity, and that's really dangerous as well, which I'll go through in a second. These guys, turtles, don't have a diaphragm, so there's no distinction between the chest cavity and the abdominal cavity. So we also need to be aware that injuries that happen in one of those two cavities can sort of, all the organs can move to the other side, and it can be a bit of a mess. So this is just a picture of a skeleton. So you can see, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but we've got the top shell and we've got the spine directly underneath that. And then we've actually got the hips, so the pelvis here, and then the legs that come out from there. And then the shoulders that come straight down here and into the legs. So you can see that if we've got damage through the shell, we're going straight into that spinal column. So in terms of prognosis, that's how we decide basically whether we can treat an injury or whether it's actually kinder to euthanize this animal. So in terms of good prognosis, plastron fractures are generally pretty good to fix. So in this image here, this is a fracture in the bottom of the shell that has been fixed with some wires and some special glue. Hairline fractures, so what I mean by that is just a very simple sort of superficial fracture, so it's not very deep, and we don't have any underlying organ damage. So yeah, no exposure to underlying tissue. So the lungs aren't hanging out, the abdominal cavity isn't exposed, and if there's no contamination, so if it's a relatively fresh wound, like if they've just been hit by a car and they haven't been hit by a car 5 to 7 days ago, they've already got a heap of dirt and debris and bacteria already contaminated that area. When we've got a poor prognosis, so this is when we say look, I think this turtle is not going to make it, or it would be kinder to put it down. So if we have a midline carapace fracture, so that's just straight down the middle of the carapace, and that's where the spine is. So that's what we need to think of, the ongoing nerve injury. A bilateral bridge fracture. So bilateral just means on both sides. So here is a bridge fracture, so that's between the carapace and the plastron. So if you've got injuries to both of those sides, it means there's probably an internal injury, and it, like, the turtle's been crushed. So it means there's probably a lot of internal bleeding and damage in here. Damage to the cranial carapace, so this is anterior, or sort of the front, so the one sort of the section that's closer to the head rather than the tail. So that's where the lungs sit, basically directly under here. So in this image, the lungs would sort of be sitting here, and these are all the intestines and things here. And then if we have a crushed head, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's pretty dangerous for that animal. So we can fix the ones that are do have good prognosis. We can fix them. There's a lot of different techniques we can use to fix them. So it could involve just really quite simple, like zip ties, and gluing zip ties on, and making sure that we're like sort of bringing these the fracture ends together so that they can heal together. Or this one is quite a complicated one that would have been a pet tortoise, and there's screws that are in the shell and then wire in between, so that's pulling the two fracture ends together. So we need to think about, first off, is this animal releasable? Because you know, being wildlife carers and wildlife advocates, our goal is to release a healthy animal back into where it belongs. Unless it's introduced, of course. So we need to think about that. Is it going to be able to function by itself in the wild? Time to heal. So it takes 1 or 2 years for bone to heal, depending on the injury. So that's a really long time for us to have it in captivity. And we need to think about how we're going to be housing these animals if we are choosing to move forward with that. As I said before, it is painful when we get injuries to these areas, so pain relief is a must. Reptiles, and particularly turtles, are really, really tough. They rarely show pain, so we need to be an advocate for them and provide them with pain relief, even if we're not seeing any signs of pain. So we use anti-inflammatories quite a bit in these guys. If they're in a hospital, we will use opioids because that they are stronger pain relievers. And we need to think about antibiotics as well. So whether we're using systemic antibiotics, and by that I mean injectable, because we can't give oral medications to turtles, they will not allow it, or topical medications, so antibiotic creams and things that you might have to put on the surface of the shell. And I've just said here, you know, if you need to think about housing if you're going to be keeping these guys, but theoretically, when we fix these shells, they need to be watertight. So once everything is dry, like all the glue and things, they should be able to go back in the water. So that's sort of the goal that we have when we're doing surgery on them. This is just something else I thought of. Some of these turtles come in injured and they're gravid. So this particular case isn't actually a wild turtle. This is a pet turtle, but you can see that it's full of eggs. You can see that on the x-rays here, and we can remove them surgically and potentially save all those little eggs, or we can medically induce them to, if safe to do so, and if they're not really sick or injured, we can medically induce them to lay those eggs with hormonal treatment. Fish hooks are the next most common thing we see in clinic. Luckily, fish hooks come up really nicely on x-rays, as you can see here. So metal comes up really bright white. So sometimes it's really simple. Sometimes it's like up here in the mouth and you can pull it out quite easily after sedating the turtle. This particular one was a little bit lower in the esophagus, so that one had to be sedated, and we could sort of manipulate it out with some forceps. If it's even lower down, or if it's really deep in the esophageal tissue, we might need to surgically open up the side of the neck and get the hook out that way and repair any damage that is there. So obviously we need to be aware that the hooks are really, really sharp, and they can cause a lot of damage. Particularly if they've been there for a really long time, they might have caused a lot of infection in there, because these guys are grabbing these hooks because they've got bait on the end of them. So it's not clean, basically. Skin injuries and infections, like I said, it's not super common that we see these. If we do, it's because of trauma. In captive turtles, it's mostly about water quality. We need to think about actually physically debriding these areas. So that means sort of scraping off all this debris and pus, because reptile pus is really solid. So just giving this guy antibiotics is not going to work as well as physically removing all of this and then starting antibiotics after that. Poor body condition is something, again, we don't really see that in wild turtles. If we do, it's probably due to an underlying chronic illness or a chronic injury. So maybe they had a fish hook that they got in like a year ago, and it's just been sitting in there and they've been unable to eat, something like that. You also got to think about reproductive state, because they will lose, females might lose a bit of weight during their reproductive season, or if they have been brumating, so if they've been sleeping for the winter. And I couldn't actually find a good photo of a turtle that had lost a lot of weight, but you sort of see depressions in the head, you see depressions in the neck, and along the limbs as well. So they look pretty sickly when they lose a lot of weight. And I just put a note here for mass mortality. So if you notice that a bunch of turtles have died in your area, report it to PERSA or the emergency, can't remember what it's called now, the emergency vet hotline, vet disease hotline or something like that. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting and sad, but wonderful what vets can do. Can I just get you to stop sharing now?
Yes, that works.
Awesome. Thank you. I have a couple of questions that have come in. We're heading towards 8 o'clock, but I believe I hope the speakers are happy to stay on for another couple of minutes if people would like to. I'm sure there's a few more questions. Okay, so I've got one here. It says, can you confirm if circle hooks are easier for vets to remove? Do you know what that?
I actually don't know what they are. Let me just see if I can work that out.
Hills Wildlife Guardians, are you on? Are you able to explain if you know what they are?
Are they just more circular? Looks like from these images. If they're more curved, they can actually be harder to, yeah. So they can actually be harder to remove, because you imagine that you're not tearing the hook out. You need to manipulate it so you're coming out, you're following that circle. So if you've got more to do that with, that's actually more difficult than something that's got less of a curve to it or circle to it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Perhaps that is a myth.
I think that's a myth, yeah.
Okay, another question. After rescuing an injured turtle for transport to the vet, is it best to keep them slightly cooler temperature as you would for other rescued species?
So I like to keep them as much as possible in their preferred optimal temperature zone, because if they're colder than they should be, it makes giving drugs really, really hard. If they're in their preferred body temperature zone, drugs will be metabolized in a predictable time, and in a predictable way. Whereas if they're too cold, it's going to take hours for an anti-inflammatory to start working. It's going to take hours for a sedation to work and for them to wake up afterwards and things like that. So if they're already in a comfortable temperature, it makes our job a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely don't leave them in the sun on a hot day.
Don't do that. You will cook them.
That'll kill them.
Okay, not too hot. Right.
Not too hot.
Not too hot.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions for our speakers? You can put your hand up or put your camera and your microphone, camera on, microphone both on. Okay. Okay. Someone's asking if you can confirm, Mike, whether turtles are native to the Barossa.
Yes, they are, and I'm giving a talk on that at Yalumba Wines on Saturday, the 15th of November, I think, at 4:30.
Yes, and it is just the long neck turtles that would be native to the Barossa. Any short necks would be introduced pets.
Yes, there are short necks there, but they're introduced, but native long necks, and probably, I think, more common than they were 200 years ago because of all the farm dams and dams on wineries and things.
Yeah, so that's something that we're actually really interested to learn more about, is the areas outside the Murray, where we've got evidence in the Murray that numbers are declining, but outside the Murray, we really don't know how the long necks are doing. And perhaps they're doing okay with all these extra, more permanent water bodies around, like dams and lakes and housing developments. Perhaps they're doing okay. So any evidence that you all have, and if you see any turtles, please put it on TurtleSat, because that gives us a much better picture of what is actually going on for them. Okay. Someone's asking about the Light River. They would also be long necks.
Long necks.
Native to the Light River. Any other questions before we finish up?
I think Lisa has a question.
Lisa, did I miss one?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes, Lisa.
So if we get a turtle that comes in from the Adelaide Hills, say, and it's ready for release, do you want it released back into the Murray or where it came from?
Where it came from.
If it's a long neck,
if it's a long neck, yeah.
And if it's a short neck? Then
keep it forever and put it in your will so you
I know. We seem to live forever in the grey area of things here. So if it's a long neck, back into the Adelaide Hills?
Yes, definitely.
Where it came from? Yep.
And if it's a short neck that's come from the Adelaide Hills?
Listen, I can't tell you to release it in places, but I've been putting a lot of thought into what we need to do with all these unwanted pets. And the thing about short necks is that they don't walk across land from farm dam to farm dam, for example. So there are places where we could put them where they're not really going to make a big problem in recreated wetlands. So Larratinga wetlands, for example, there's a lot of short necks in there. And I think Deanne told me that they're even put in there to help rescue them from the tube worms. And they're not going to escape from Larratinga wetlands. And I went to Warrabinda, which is a sort of a revegetated old dam that the steam trains used to fill up with water from there. And there's a lot of short necks in there as well. So places like that.
So what about Sturt, where the lagoons are at the Aboriginal heritage place?
There's short necks in there. I've been down there and caught them. So what is it? Oh, the name's gone out of my mind, but I know where you mean.
And currently it's not legal to release them back into any of those places. But the only place I believe was Cleland, which is because it's fenced, and that now is getting a bit full. But we're going to be trying to work with the Department for Environment and Water to look at some better options for these, some more education for people when they buy them as pets, and perhaps
Yeah.
they'll rethink the idea of buying a pet that grows that big and lives for that long, so that we
Yeah,
might
I
get
mean,
less pets. And
I
then also,
usually-
where are other places that they could be put?
Yeah, because I deal with lizards, and you can't, people can't take their pets or anything that they find or you want to release to Cleveland anymore either.
Yeah, so it's a bit of
Yeah.
a problem for what do people
Yeah.
do with them.
Yeah.
I know in New South Wales there's someone with a massive 400-acre property with lots of big ponds on it, and he's just taking all of these unwanted pets, and he's got
Yeah.
hundreds of them. But you know,
Yeah. We've got a couple of people that have got acreage that will take them, but that everybody's getting full, you know, and there's only so much you can do once they've got their territory when you're trying to introduce even more. So with the lizards anyway, so.
Yeah, and I think if we can just get less people keeping them as pets, if they're not going to keep them forever, might be one little thing we can do, but I'm not sure how big an impact it'll have. We've just got a few other questions coming.
But there's just one thing, Sylvia.
Yep.
There is some suggestion that long necks actually suppress the activities, the whole life cycle of short necks suppress the activity of long necks, at least in the Murray. So, you know, in a natural environment, they're sort of in balance. But when you get them into a confined area, like a recreated wetland or something like that, and you've got a lot of them, then the introduced short necks might actually adversely affect the native long necks.
Yes, so that, it can be a problem for the long necks that were there. And so there was a question, about how do we tell if they're pets or not? And really that's not really possible, is it, Mike?
So some of us who have, you know, caught hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of turtles in their natural environment can very often tell if a turtle's been raised in captivity, because the diet's not quite right and the shells don't look right. But you need a lot of practice to be able to do that, and you can't do it in all cases, and especially where people have, you know, got a pet when it's already an adult and the shell is already formed. But the diet for the turtles is really important for their shell development, and particularly their calcium metabolism.
So, okay.
But if you see one walking down Unley Road, it's probably a pet. Whereas if you see one walking across the Botanic Gardens, well, it could be an escaped pet or a released pet, or it could be naturally from the torrents.
The pearls in the handbag give it away sometimes, if it's an Unley. I just had some questions. So Deanna suggested that pets might not release the smell, that defense smell, as much as a wild one might, because they're more used to being handled, but it's probably not foolproof, but that might give you an indication. There's a question here about how well do long and short necks coexist together, and you did mention this, that there can be some antagonism between them. Did you want to say any more on that one?
No, short necks tend to be a bit more sort of aggressive, bitey, if you like, than long necks. But amongst the turtle biologists, we have a bit of debate about how important that is or not. But there is some evidence that short necks do interfere with long necks.
And there is also the issue of introducing disease potentially as well, as happened in the Bellingen River, which had very unfortunate consequences for their local turtle species. All right. Alice, can you see any other questions? Does anyone have their hand up? Have I missed any?
No, I think you've got them all.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you so much to our speakers. Oh, no, Alice.
We got one more.
Sorry,
We got one
Alice has one more. Okay. Alice from Fauna Rescue has a question. Okay, social media people reporting escaped pets. Oh, she's typing us a question. Around Burnside and Waterfall Gully, but I think, are you suggesting that potentially if they're around Waterfall Gully and they're long necks, they might actually, yes, but you're suggesting they might be on walkabout. And yes, Mike, would you agree that if they're long neck species around Waterfall Gully, Burnside, where there's creek lines, they could well be naturally
you get,
living there.
unless there's some other evidence, you can't really tell whether they're introduced
you'd
or whether
assume
they're pets or not. Yeah.
That they're native and they could go back. Hopefully that answers your question, Alice. Yes, I think sounds like you're right.
And yes, pet natives could be biohazards.
Oh, okay. So people want to keep them. Oh, I see. I see what the issue is here. So if they're a pet, because there's no regulation of the pet industry, this is funny things with wildlife, isn't it? That as pets and with pet shops and breeders, there's hardly any regulation at all. And so a pet can be just swapped from one person to another. You don't need to have a permit to keep a pet turtle. However, if you're rescuing a wild turtle, then you will need a permit to keep it. So I think she's suggesting there that people say that they're pets if they find one, therefore they're allowed to keep them without a permit. Those seem a little bit tricky, and I would suggest, yes, that they are wild ones and they shouldn't be keeping them if they don't need to be rescued. Oh, okay. Here's a tricky question. We might hear all night people with these kind of questions coming in. We'll have to call it soon. This one is, why are short necks listed as vulnerable if they're the more dominant and widespread? Although the short necks aren't actually the widespread one. The short necks are just, well, in their natural environment, they're just restricted to the Murray. But yes, this is also another tricky situation for them in that while they're vulnerable in the Murray, they are now found all over the place thanks to released pets. Mike, do you have any comments on that?
The listing of these things is a bit odd to me, but yeah. So in South Australia, in the Murray, the short necks are the ones in biggest trouble, but they're not listed. But outside of the Murray, they actually, well, at least in the Hills and Fleurieu, they might be doing well. In the southeast, they might be in trouble. We just don't have the data to know that. But we do know that the short necks in the Murray have declined by 70% or more in South Australia in the last 40 years. So they are in trouble. That's why they're listed.
And these are some of these tricky questions that we'd like to delve into a bit more in terms of the turtle management plan for South Australia. You know, the fact that this vulnerable species is now found all over the state. What does that mean for this species' future? And so all the information we can get is really helpful. So any turtles that you guys come across, if you can put the records on TurtleSat, and you can do an approximate dot of where it was collected from rather than from your house, would be good. And we're really keen to stay in touch with you all and see what we can all do together for turtles. And a big thank you to our speakers, Professor Mike Thompson and Dr. Amelia Cottle. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
No problem.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.